there's nothing in this bill that is objectionable to a reasonable person who
No.
lives in a, liberal Western democracy.
So right here in the very beginning of the story, they're setting this up as CRT is a phantom menace.
Right.
Something that completely doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
And then later in the story, they're basically saying, this has to be in schools. It's very dangerous to ban this. That bill doesn't take away your ability to teach about slavery or the Underground Railroad or Jim Crow or any of that stuff. It does take away your ability to point at all that stuff and say, this is an example of white privilege. Man, they got their CRT down. They're just nuking CRT off the map. Yes. We will not be fighting over this, Sitch, I promise, because this story is insane. So GOP bill bans critical race theory. Wait, GOP bill banning critical race theory are racist. Oh,
racist.
Let me try one more time here. Let's start again. GOP bills. God, I swear I can read. Banning critical race theory are racist. And Democrats should say so. Then do you think, what's the subtext here? Making white people
uncomfortable is being made a crime.
Making white people uncomfortable is being made a crime? I thought it always, I thought that was always a crime.
Well, no, you can make people uncomfortable, but not on the we're not supposed to on the basis of their race.
Doesn't it really depend upon how uncomfortable you're making them? Because, I don't like to be mugged. It makes me very uncomfortable.
And do you like the picture? It's got a bunch of stop teaching critical race theory, and then the Democrat donkey just has like a ... It has no response. Okay.
Yeah, I know. These Democrats, they need to respond.
This is classic insane tribal behavior, insane elephant stupidity. You see this on both the left and the right, where they say, oh, our enemies are attacking us and our guys are just silent. They're not doing anything. And you're like, bitch, what world do you live in? We've covered multiple videos on this very topic where all you hear is the Democrats, knee pad wearing, de-sucking media just saying these critical race theory bans are racist. These critical race theory bans are racist. MSNBC has been saying this nonstop. And so what world do they live in where this argument isn't being made?
A fantasy world. A complete fantasy world. This article reeks of a fantasy world. That's what I like about it. It begins basically them saying, well, hold on. Where's this line here? It begins saying that it's only a college topic. It says, forget that CRT is a law school topic. The GOP is returning to the phantom menace. Phantom menace. It believes will scare the win. It will scare and win over white suburban voters, given their belief that the Republican Glenn Youngkin won the Virginia gubernatorial race last year on that issue. So right here in the very beginning of the story, they're setting this up as CRT is a phantom menace.
Right.
Something that completely doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
And then later in the story, they're basically saying, this has to be in schools. It's very dangerous to ban this. This trend of banning CRT is dangerous and not just typical political theater.
That's how.
Excuse me. Excuse me here.
That's the perfect gaslighting. It's like this thing that you're afraid of isn't happening, but it's really bad if you get rid of it.
How is this? How are these two sentences so close to one another?
I know.
Normally they bury these sentences further apart. So what is happening in this article?
Well, let me read from the beginning. Republicans believe they found their winning issue for the 2022 election, banning what they call critical race theory from being taught to students from kindergarten to college. This is especially true in swing states like Wisconsin, where Governor Tony Evers, a Democrat, vetoed the GOP-controlled legislation's bill banning the subject. The leading GOP candidate for governors are seeing who can out CRT ban the other. So in Wisconsin, the Democrat governor banned or vetoed the CRT bill. Okay. Let me read you some things from what that bill says. You can see if this is worth vetoing. Okay.
I'll tell you right.
Okay. This is in Wisconsin. A school board or the operator of a charter school established under blah, blah, blah shall not allow a teacher to teach race or sex stereotyping, including any of the following concepts. A, one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. B, an individual by the virtue of the individual's race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously.
Well, that's going to be a problem for CRT, but I don't see any problem with that.
Right. C, an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment because of the individual's race or sex.
Oh, yeah, no, that sounds fine.
D, an individual of one race or sex are not able to and should not attempt to treat others without respect to race or sex. Sounds good so far. E, an individual's moral character is necessarily determined by an individual's race or sex.
I like that one.
Yeah, we shouldn't be teaching. Well, this is what you shouldn't be teaching. They're saying.
Right. Well, I'm saying that they're banning discrimination in that way. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
F, an individual by the virtue of the individual's race or sex bears responsibility for acts committed in the past by other individuals of the same race or sex.
It's strange that that's in a bill. I mean, it seems
right. It seems so obvious. It seems so uncontroversial.
Right. Yeah.
It really seemed like it's something that should be vetoed.
We shouldn't blame people for things that they're people that look like them did in the past.
Yeah. G, an individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of the individual's race or sex.
Yeah, you shouldn't make them feel uncomfortable for what race they are or sex
That's
they are.
the one that they always try to focus on and twist, because they're like, oh, what that means is that if you feel bad about being white because you see a video about slavery, then that will be outlawed. And it's like, no. And I'm so glad that this law says specifically, it says an individual should feel. Okay. So what that means is they're saying the teachers should not, it would be illegal for the teachers to intentionally say you should feel bad because of your race.
That's the problem that's being shoehorned into classrooms.
Right.
They're saying all these terrible things that were done in the past by white people, those are your people.
Right? Yeah, right. You should feel some responsibility, some guilt for that.
That's the problem.
Right.
Yes.
And here's the last one. Maybe this one is the problematic one. H, systems based on meritocracy or traits such as hard work ethic are racist or sexist or are created by individuals of a particular race to oppress individuals of another race.
Man, they got their CRT down. They're just nuking CRT off the map.
Right. So there's nothing in this bill that is objectionable to a reasonable person who lives in a, liberal Western democracy.
True.
And yet we have the governor vetoing it because politics, because Republican passed, so that's bad. And I read an article from MSNBC that told me that this is racist and will prevent the teaching of history. So I'm going to veto it.
Yeah, Tony Evers vetoed a perfectly good anti-racist bill. I think Tony Evers himself might be a racist.
Right.
Yeah. And anyone who would veto that bill definitely is a racist.
And the bills are written that way intentionally. They're written that way, but I forget whatever they're called, by the organization. There's some think tank that Rufo is part of that writes all these bills, and they write them to make the Democrats look like
giant
utter morons and racists for being against these bills, and they're succeeding. And I would not be surprised at all if Tony Evers loses his next election. I mean, Wisconsin is a swing state.
Yeah, they're gonna say, look, Tony Evers vetoed a bill that said you can't discriminate against people based on race. That's exactly what they're gonna say, right? I mean, and he did. It's not even a lie.
It's so baffling. This is such a bad move politically. Like, why? And this article is idiotic too, because the article is like, oh, Republicans think they're going to win on the CRT issue. It's like, well, okay, if you think they're going to win on the CRT issue, why don't you deflate the issue by just agreeing with them so there's no fight on it?
Yes. Yeah.
And then you move on. You know, then they can't use that as an issue anymore.
Well, just to steel man their argument, as they say.
Okay.
I understand the argument that they're making. They're saying that the Republicans don't understand CRT and are therefore making these overly broad bills trying to ban it and inadvertently banning other things that are not CRT, like Black history. But I mean, obviously that bill doesn't do any of that. That bill doesn't take away your ability to teach about slavery or the Underground Railroad or Jim Crow or any of that stuff. It does take away your ability to point at all that stuff and say, this is an example of white privilege because these things happened. You inherited a system that has privileged you over other people, and therefore you have materially benefited from those crimes in the past. It's basically like saying, you know, your ancestors raped and pillaged, and now that's the money you're using to go to college, which is fucked up. It's totally fucked up.
Yeah, well, it's just so strange to me. It's not strange, I guess. It's just it shows how tribalism is so powerful that it leads people to what I believe. Now, listen, I'm just some idiot on a computer. I'm not a career politician, so what do I know? But it just seems to me that from a cold, calculating political position, if I'm the governor of Wisconsin, and I'm afraid that the CRT issue is going to be an issue that's going to get me voted out of office, how is doing what all the other idiots are doing that hasn't worked? How's that going to work? How's it going to say, oh, this is a bill that's racist? It's going to teach people. It's going to say that you can't teach history because the Republicans are racist. If that hasn't worked so far anywhere, why would we keep doing it over and over and over again? Do they honestly? But here's do they actually believe this, or do they know that it's bullshit and they're just trying to use their racist talking point to win elections?
Who's the they in that sense?
The the Democrats and the governors that are making these arguments.
Right. The Democrats are in a tough position politically because they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. Because if the bills pass, the Republicans will count a win against critical race theory, and that will hurt them with their core voters. And if they veto it just so that the Republicans don't have a win, then the Republicans can call them racist and say they're vetoing anti-racist bills. And also, just one more point, the Republicans are going to bat for a legitimate grievance that parents have, because this stuff is in schools. This stuff is, there's people using this framework to teach an anti-white agenda in school. I think that's clear. I think Christopher Rufo has shown enough materials, and just enough people on YouTube are bringing forward materials. Like we're constantly seeing videos that are like, private school board meetings where they're talking about this stuff. We've covered stuff like this on the Sunday show. So I do think there's a legitimate grievance here that the Democrats are just morally blind to. They don't see any problem in painting white people as privileged and making white kids feel bad about it. I mean, they're on a moral quest to do that.
Sure.
Yeah. So am I incorrect or?
Well, no, you're correct. But I was wondering is the reason that, Tony Evers and the other Democrats are on this, like, do they feel locked in because the media has created this lie about CRT that they now have to just keep supporting the lie? Or do they honestly believe it? Or do they not believe it, but they still think it's politically advantageous for them to continue to lie about it? Because I would think
which lie though? The lie that it's just
the lie that the CRT bans
educated stuff. TRT doesn't exist.
Yeah, the lie that the lie that CRT bans are racism and that they're designed to prevent you from learning history.
Right.
Like, it's just baffling to me. They should just come out and say, we're fine with what this bill says. We think, this, if we read the bill, it just says a bunch of stuff we think is not objectionable, and we agree people shouldn't be racist, and just move on. Just take the issue away.
Yeah, it would be even better if they came out and said, oh, because then this would play into the narrative that they're already promoting, the narrative that what they're trying to ban isn't CRT. They could just come out and say, oh, this bill's fine. This isn't CRT. Like, here we go, pass it.
They could even lie and say this bill isn't CRT. This is just banning racism.
Even though that bill
which is already banned, really
targeted CRT. Like that bill
I know,
CRT from space.
But the average person isn't going to realize that.
No. Most of the arguments around CRT are really just Sitch's law. They're arguing definitions. Yeah. What is the definition? So before we move on, do you have any more savory quotes from this article? Because I do remember it being...
I want to give credit. Well, I want to read the next paragraph because there's some credit. There's some credit where credit is due. Okay. It says the trend of banning CRT is dangerous and not just typical political theater. We are already seeing how these broadly worded CRT bans enacted by Republicans in 14 states are erasing the history of blacks in America. Mm-hmm. A history teacher in Oklahoma City feared using the word, quote, white to describe people who defended slavery because it could be a fireable offense under Oklahoma's new law.
And I say great.
So
I say that's awesome because guess what? There were whites on the Underground Railroad, you moron.
Well, there you go.
There were whites on both sides. That's why it's they're doing it. This is where they're doing it for anti-white racist reasons. They really are. They want to say, oh, the white people are the ones that are always defending racism, as if there's not white people, or defending slavery, as if there's not white people that are terribly against slavery. A whole fucking North, the whole northern states were against slavery.
Well, right, but it depends how they word it too. I mean, we don't know from this quote, because if you just say, "Oh, white people are the ones who are defending slavery," it's like, well, it's true. White people were the ones defending slavery, but it's also true that there was lots of white people who were against slavery.
But the CRT anti-white people are framing it as a whites against blacks. Their entire narrative is that slavery built America, and that everything white people possess and own is a product of stealing it from blacks. That's their whole narrative.
Let me read you the Oklahoma law.
All right.
That I don't believe has passed yet, was being discussed. And this is the first time we've read a bunch of these laws on stream. I read a bunch of these laws privately. This is the first time I've read one of these laws and said, this is a bad law. Mm-hmm. Okay. And it's actually not an anti-CRT law at all. It doesn't address any of the issues the anti-CRT laws address.
So this is a bad CRT law.
Well, because it's not an anti-CRT law. It's actually it's specifically an anti-1619 project law. Mm-hmm. So some elements are fine with, but some elements are stupid. Mm-hmm. And there's 5 parts of this law. It says, okay, so no state agency or school, blah, 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 should be allowed to teach components of the 1619 project, which I'm fine with, including, number 1, any teaching that America has more culpability in general than any other nations for the institution of slavery. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Agree.
Number 2, that one race is the unique oppressor in the institution of slavery.
Agree.
Number 3, that another race is the unique victim in the institution of slavery.
Agree.
Number 4, that America in general had slavery more extensively and for a later period of time than other nations.
That's questionable. That's when the Democrats come out and talk about how, they want to whitewash history. That's a little sus. Right?
Yeah. That's the big problem segment. Yes.
Didn't the United States have slavery? I mean, England never had slavery, right?
Right.
I mean,
there's a lot. Yeah. It's factually untrue. Yes. America had slavery more extensively for a later period of time than lots of other countries.
Right. Yeah. That's why I thought it's factually incorrect.
Right. It is factually incorrect. But also, I have a problem with the previous two sections.
Really? The ones that I signed off on?
Yes.
All right, let's
The one
box.
race is the unique oppressor and one race is unique victim.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, that's true globally, right? But in the terms of American history, sure, you can find, there was the black guy, I forget his name, that Chappelle talked about. There's like the black guy who had black slaves, and he was a slave. And when he was freed, he owned black slaves. It's like, okay, but if 99% of slavers are white and 99% of slaves in America are black, I think it's okay to talk about that in a general term. And when it comes to American history, I think it's fine to categorize things as that way.
No, I don't. I think it's. I don't.
You don't.
I disagree. Yeah.
Okay.
Just because
what's the disagreement here?
Well, the disagreement is there are so many whites that didn't participate in slavery and so many blacks that weren't slaves. I mean,
but wait, that's a different thing. I'm not saying that all white people should be categorized as owning slaves. That's obviously untrue.
Right. What are you saying then?
The law says that one race is the unique oppressor in the institution of slavery and one race is unique victim in the institution of slavery regarding American history. Regarding American history, I disagree. True. That's true.
Disagree.
Though. It's mostly true.
Disagree.
Okay. You can quibble with that they use the word unique, which I would agree with. They're like technically true.
Yeah, but it's not the problem that I have is that it's not the entire race. When you say one race, you're basically saying all white people, and there were plenty of white people that did not participate in the institution of slavery.
I see what you're saying.
Great Britain went out of its way to destroy the transatlantic slave trade.
Well,
so
again,
you're saying
we're only talking about America, though.
But I understand what you're saying. In that sense, you're saying the North. A big debate over whether or not a state was going to come in was whether or not it was going to be a slave state or a non-slave state.
I understand. Yeah. You're saying that when you hear the section say that one race is the unique oppressor in the institution of slavery,
you're talking about the whole race.
Right. You're interpreting that as saying you can't say that the whole race of white people is the oppressor.
Correct.
That's not how I interpret that sentence.
Well, it could be interpreted either way. And that's the problem with it. Because the CRT people are interpreting it. Yeah, it is the whole race. That's the way they are interpreting it.
Right. So if this law wanted to be not stupid, they should rewrite the sections to say, instead of saying that one race is unique oppressors, to say that all white people were the oppressors in the institution of slavery.
No, that would be what? That's to make it. Oh, they can't say that.
You can't teach that. You can't teach that.
Okay, okay, yeah, that would fix it. Yes,
you replace that sentence with the prohibition that all white people were the oppressors in the institution of slavery.
There you go. Yeah, that would fix it. Okay. Yeah. Yes, and that would also be aimed at the CRT because that's a conflation the CRT people are making.
Okay, and you remove the slavery was more extensively for a later period of time than other nations completely because I think that's just fucking
it's untrue. Just factually incorrect.
Right. And then they can keep the last sentence, which was the primary and overarching purpose of the founding of America was the initiation and perpetuation of slavery.
Yes.
Which is not true at all.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, but this is so far it says the only of this quote unquote anti-CRT laws, which I think they have any merit on complaining about.
Before we move on, just what do you think is going to happen with critical race theory in the midterms elections and elections going forward? Because I feel like this is just such a winning issue for kind of for both sides that it really, it's going to drive a lot of people on both sides to the polls.
But before I answer that question, the one last thing I want to say about this bill, this bill is also extra shitty because it doesn't include any of the stuff that we just talked about, like the other bill in Wisconsin included. It doesn't say anything about like you can't, say someone is guilty for their sins of their ancestors. It doesn't say anything about saying people have unconscious racism, blah blah blah. It doesn't say any of that stuff.
It's
very clear that this bill was not written by or with in accordance with the Chris Rufo think tank that's writing on the bills, because the language it uses is completely different. So I think they tried to do their own thing out in Oklahoma, and I think they royally fucked up.
we're not going to listen to this city slicker, Chris Rufo.
Right.
We know how to do it.
But no, I think CRT is a completely winning issue for the Republican Party.
And for the Democrats in that
it's a completely losing issue for the Democrats.
Well, it's going to drive people to it's going to drive their base to the polls.
I don't think it is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's going to, I don't think that the Democrats are going to turn out people to the polls during the midterm because they're afraid that Republicans are banning, history from being taught. I think Republicans are going to drive a bunch of their voters to the polls saying, the Democrats are trying to teach your children to hate America and hate white people.
Yeah, I guess you're right. It's a complete overreach on the Democrats' part because they believe their voters are so interested in them being able to teach Black history in schools that it's going to drive them to the polls. And that's a larger driving force than Republicans fearing their kids being taught racism and anti-white stereotypes.
Right.
That's just like nuclear. It's like Republican turnout is going to be off the charts.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And they should, and as the article even talks about in the beginning, they should have learned that from, Glenn Youngkin in the Virginia governor's race
and the school board meetings, all
right.
of this. Yeah.
I mean, because it all comes to the parents don't like this insane idea that like, oh, you should have no control over what your students learn.
And I guess they're really gunning for
what
useful,
your kids learn. Yeah.
I guess they're gunning for useful idiots because they're spinning this as the parents don't know what they're talking about. And I think the parents do know what they're talking about. I feel like they do.
Yeah, I think the parents do. I mean,
they're not going to be gaslit by this. That's what I'm
right.
saying.
It's, you read the literature, you read this, all white people have privilege, all white people are racist. I mean, one of the books, I forget where it was, in what state it was. One of the books had the kids reading that book that had like, you need to denounce your whiteness. And the contract of whiteness had like a devil horns, and a devil tail and stuff.
Yeah.
This is for children. It's like, no, like a parent looks at that and says, what?
Up.
That's the thing. It's just so obviously on its face, like a parent. Well, and that's why I don't think it will drive any Democrat voters, because the only Democratic voters that'd be motivated to be like, oh, I have to protect my state so that the Republicans can't outlaw teaching of history.
Right.
The only people that feel that way, that buy into that narrative, they're the people that rushed out to vote anyway.
Yeah. They're the base. They're not the moderates.
You have to motivate the people who are like kind of like
middle
iffy
of the
about
road.
Yeah, who are kind of.
Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show, and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.